My name is Sable Morgan, 32 years old. The lights in Bedford County Court hummed like they were straining against the silence that followed my father's words. He leaned into the microphone as if he were telling a story at a diner, and the sentence came out polished from years of rehearsal. She wasted her life, never held a real job. The words slid off his tongue with a kind of practiced finality and landed exactly where he wanted them, between my ribs. Across the room, the judge removed his wire rims, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and fixed his gaze on him. Calm, clipped. "Sir," he said, "your daughter was a SEAL operative for 12 years. For a second, nobody breathed. Aunt Luann's hymnal slipped to the floor, the soft thud slicing through the silence. My brother Kyle froze mid-motion, pen suspended, staring at me as though the word operative had cracked reality. Dalton, my father's attorney, let his pen bleed ink into the page where it had stopped. And I folded my hands in my lap and counted breaths, 4 in, 6 out, the way muscle memory demands when your heart forgets rhythm. 2 weeks earlier, I hadn't been standing under fluorescent lights. I'd been scraping flaking paint off a wobbly chair on the back steps of my duplex, promising Mrs. Doy I'd fix it before her grandkids came over. The late August air smelled of tar from a road crew and grass clippings from high school fields where a band staggered through Louie Louie. That was Bedford. You learned the town by sound. The manila envelope from the Lynchburg law office had come tucked under a coupon circular and a gas bill. Probate hearing. Motion to expedite the sale of my mother's house. Petitioner. Earl Morgan, my father. He wanted to liquidate the one place where my mother's voice still lived in the walls. I'd slid the envelope into a drawer with grocery flyers, pretending the paper was as ordinary as a pizza menu. But the words pulsed anyway. When you've been trained to hear a latch click 3 rooms away, paper can roar louder than artillery. At the farmer's market that weekend, I stacked Aunt Luann's pound cakes on a folding table. She told me to smile out of old habit. Folks stopped by with polite questions, the kind that keep conversations surface level. What are you up to these days? Still doing odd jobs? I kept my answers vague. Here and there, I said, the kind of soft reply that doesn't start fires. Dad pulled his van into a spot like a drawer slammed shut. He clapped Kyle on the shoulder, loud enough for everyone to hear. Kyle's closing on a condo in Roanoke. Real work, real money. Then he looked at me. You thinking about something steady yet? Morning to you too, Dad. Aunt Luann smoothed the air like she could iron tension with her palms, but my eyes had already drifted to the courthouse steps. I knew where the security line began and when the clerk broke for lunch. Some knowledge never fades, whether or not you want it. That evening, Janine, my attorney, called. We'll contest the motion, she said. If the judge allows an in-camera review, he can see what he needs without putting it all on the record. In camera? I repeated, chewing on the phrase. Private. It keeps your dad from turning the courthouse steps into a spectacle. Do you have the mortgage allotment records? I do, I told her. And the other thing? We won't use the other thing unless we have to, she said gently. You've carried it long enough. After we hung up, I slid open the shallow drawer in my kitchen, one that looks like a rubber band drawer until you pulled just right. Beneath lay 3 items, a folded letter embossed with a trident, a stack of pay stubs with black rectangles blotting the classified sections, and a photograph of my mother mid-song at a Christmas program. Eyes closed, mouth open, prayer in motion. I kept the letter and stubs. I placed the photo face down. Bedford doesn't care for car chases or spy thrillers. Proof in this town looks like pie at the church market or a hymn book pressed into your palm. But secrets leak, whether in the scratch of a chair leg across concrete or in the way you flinch when someone mentions Virginia Beach. The night before court, I idled in Mom's driveway, watching the porch light she loved blink stubbornly alive. The flower bed had dulled into green, but if you knew where to look, you could see next May hiding in tiny nubs. I whispered to her through the screen door that I'd keep it decent, that I wasn't angry, just tired. Friday came. I wore a navy dress that didn't wrinkle and flats I could stand in for hours. Nothing that might start a conversation. The line for the metal detector curled down the courthouse stairs. When it was my turn, I placed the folder on the tray and stepped through. The deputy nodded. I nodded back. Dad was already leaning against paneled wood, spinning some tale to Kyle and his shop buddies. Good heart, no plan, I heard him say. Then he spotted me, chin lifting like we were equals in a duel. I took the back row. It's the seat you pick when you want the whole field of view, when you're trained to scan exits, memorize faces, listen for the one sound that doesn't belong. The bailiff called our case. The judge looked younger in person than his newspaper photo, but his eyes were old, eyes that had heard every kind of lie, every kind of love. Janine answered clean, her voice steady. Dad's attorney droned about lack of financial contribution. Then Dad leaned forward and dropped his line. She wasted her life, never held a real job. The sentence cracked something inside me, but it didn't linger like it used to. Because this time, it wasn't just me hearing it, it was the whole courtroom. The judge set his glasses on the bench like they needed both hands to carry. His voice stayed calm, clipped, surgical. Sir, your daughter was a SEAL operative for 12 years. And just like that, my secret, years of silent service, the scars I pressed when storms rolled in, the training that still made me count my breaths, sat exposed under courthouse lights. Gasps, stares, silence. But beneath all that, one thought thudded steady in my chest. The letter in my drawer didn't tell the whole story. Some things I'd lived would never appear in any verification. Some things were buried too deep, even for classified ink. And as my father's face slackened into something between disbelief and fear, I realized that what unsettled him wasn't just what he hadn't known, it was what else I still wasn't saying. After court that morning, I didn't go straight home. I ducked into Janine's office above the State Farm Agency, the one that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and hot plastic from the screen print shop below. Her stairwell was narrow, forcing you to turn sideways if anyone came down, and the gray-painted door stuck unless you lifted it while pulling. Orderly, not fancy. Inside, Janine had already spread the motion packet across her desk like a fan of oversized playing cards. Neon tabs flagged each exhibit: title history, mom's will, mortgage statements, my allotment records, proof reduced to paper. Earl's argument is simple, she said, sliding a spreadsheet toward me. You were a long-term guest without financial contribution. That's his story. We're going to unwind it with this. The spreadsheet carried Dalton's signature, his neat, lawyerly print, transforming my life into columns and deficit lines. No mention of the automatic allotments. No acknowledgement of transfers that had left my account month after month. You've carried the proof long enough, Janine reminded me, tapping the tab marked Exhibit 4. Now it carries you. She flipped to another page. Mom's handwriting, round and steady, on the inside cover of a hymn book. Mortgage. Beck's automatic help. Don't breathe a word to Earl. It will upset him. A paperclip shadow bisected the note, like a cross standing watch over every word. I pressed my finger against the copy as if heat might seep into the paper. Mom's voice filled my ears. You can stand up without shouting. She used to say it after choir practice when we carried risers back to the storage room. Her alto had anchored the harmonies. She believed in holding the middle while others took the pretty line. For her, silence was dignity. For me, it had become survival. Still, looking at the note now, I wondered how much of her silence had been for me, and how much had been because she knew what Dad would do if truth didn't suit his picture. Janine leaned back, pen tapping. We'll keep this soft. No parades, no shouting. The judge is the audience, not the benches. I nodded, but my jaw was tight. Because as much as I wanted to follow Mom's path, part of me longed to rip Dalton's spreadsheet in half. To stand in the middle of Main Street and scream about every allotment check, every year I'd wired part of my pay to keep that house standing. Instead, I breathed in 4, out 6, a discipline old as bone. That night, I went home and opened the drawer again. The Trident letter lay there, stripped of detail, a broom closet of words. Bare, clean, clinical. Assigned in an operational capacity. Multiple commendations withheld. Records sealed pursuant to statute. It was enough for court, but I knew the letter was missing the one incident that never left me. A raid gone sideways. A child in the wrong room at the wrong time. My decision to hold fire cost us the objective, and maybe saved a life we weren't sent to save. The report erased the details, reduced it to unexpected civilian presence. But the scar under my collarbone, the one the weather made ache, carried more truth than any ink. I pressed my thumb against it now, as thunder rolled somewhere far off. Proof doesn't always look like ribbons or pay stubs. Sometimes it looks like the breath you still feel brushing past your ear in dreams. The next morning, Bedford carried on as if no courtroom had cracked open a secret. Mrs. Doy asked if her chair was ready. The Food Lion cashier asked if I wanted to round up for the shelter. I said yes, as I always did. It was easier to be generous with coins than with truth. But beneath the hum of ordinary life, I felt the ground shifting. Because proof wasn't just about my past, it was about my intent. Janine had drafted language for the Elaine Morgan Choir Scholarship. A single paragraph, modest and plain, about honoring community voices and providing small awards to local students studying music. It's not filed with the court, she told me, but I want it in your pocket if the judge asks about intent. Judges listen differently when purpose walks in with you. Purpose. I hadn't thought much about that word in years. Missions were objectives. Service was duty. Purpose was something you tried not to think about too long, because if you did, you started asking whether the ledger of lives saved and lives lost ever balanced. But Mom believed in purpose. She left it in hymnal margins, in whispered reminders not to breathe a word to Dad, in the light she left burning on the porch so no one ever came home to darkness. As I copied the scholarship language into my folder, I found myself whispering the words like a vow. Not for Dad, not even for the judge, for her. And yet, even as I held that vow, unease stirred, because Janine had flagged something else in the mortgage statements. 2 deposits, small, irregular, that didn't match my cycle. They weren't mine. Could be an accounting error, she said, or someone else trying to put their fingerprints on the house. Who? I asked. She shook her head. We'll look, but it means someone else knew more than they should. That night, lying awake with cicadas buzzing through the open window, I thought about those stray deposits. Proof again, but whose? And a darker thought pressed in. If Mom had been leaving breadcrumbs and hymnals, maybe she hadn't trusted me with everything. Maybe the house carried a secret bigger than my allotments, bigger than Dad's bluster, bigger even than the sealed letter in my drawer. I closed my eyes and tried to count breaths. 4 in, 6 out. But sleep never came. Because purpose had walked into my pocket that day. And with it, the suspicion that someone else had been walking in Mom's shadow, leaving just enough behind to make me wonder whose side of the ledger I was really on. In Bedford, news doesn't spread so much as seep, through church pews, across checkout lines, whispered in the shade of the VFW lawn. By Monday, the courthouse moment had already been distilled into a dozen versions. Some said the judge had scolded Dad for lying. Others claimed I'd marched into the courtroom in uniform, chest full of medals. Nobody mentioned the truth, because the truth never makes as good a story as the stories people invent. At the farmer's market that weekend, I felt the weight of glances before I saw the faces. Church ladies arranging pies into straight lines, eyes flicking up, then back down. A man at the kettle corn booth clearing his throat like he'd just remembered something urgent. Aunt Luann stationed herself beside me, hawking her pound cakes with a smile too wide to be entirely natural. She squeezed my arm once, her silent way of telling me to ignore the whispers. But Dad didn't do ignoring. He drove his van up, sliding it into a space with his usual heavy-handed precision, and climbed out already talking. Kyle's condo papers are signed, he announced to no one in particular. Real work, real money, that's how you build a future. He didn't look at me when he said it, but every syllable pointed my direction. Kyle, to his credit, shifted uncomfortably. Morning, Beck, he said softly, like he wanted to acknowledge me, without igniting another round of fireworks. Morning, I returned, neutral, non-combustible. Dad clapped his big hands together. This family doesn't need drifters. We need builders. The words carried across the tables, designed to. I stacked cakes without looking up, jaw tight. Luann tried to smooth it over, telling him to hush and help carry the folding chairs. But he just laughed, loud and booming, like his volume could rewrite reality. When the market thinned out, I caught sight of something, or rather, someone, across the courthouse square. A man standing too still, hands in his pockets, watching the flow of people. Not talking to anyone, not buying anything, just watching. When my eyes landed on him, he turned away, drifting toward the war memorial as if suddenly interested in the names carved there. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Bedford is small enough that you know when a face doesn't belong. Later, at the diner, the hum of ceiling fans mingled with the scrape of forks against chipped plates. I sat at the counter, nursing a mug of coffee that had long since gone bitter, when 2 men in baseball caps leaned close behind me. 12 years, one whispered, not as quietly as he thought. I figured she was just between gigs. Between gigs and keeping folks breathing ain't the same thing, the other replied. They thought they were being discreet. They weren't, but I let the words hang. Sometimes silence is its own kind of defense. That night, I walked a loop past the VFW. Plastic chairs scraped concrete, flags hung frayed at the tips. Cal Whitaker, old school, sat in his pressed shirt with a cane propped beside him. He didn't ask questions. He just gave me a nod that felt like permission to keep breathing. It was the opposite of Dad's bluster. Cal's kind of recognition was quieter, heavier, and it landed deeper. At home, I rinsed paintbrushes from the chair project and tried to focus on the ordinary rhythm of water slapping against bristles, but unease stuck. Twice now, I'd spotted the same stranger, once at the courthouse portraits, now at the market. Too precise to be coincidence. I checked locks, scanned the parking lot before stepping inside, listened for the telltale rhythm of a latch that had been disturbed. Old habits. They never fade, even when you want them to. And as I sat on my porch with the repaired chair drying beside me, I realized something that made my stomach knot tighter than Dad's words ever had. Secrets don't just spill out in courtrooms. Sometimes they walk around in borrowed jackets, watching from shadows, waiting for the right moment to knock on your door. Janine's office smelled of copier, toner, and peppermint tea when I arrived the following week. She had the exhibits arrayed on her desk in strict order, neon tabs sprouting like flags from manila folders. Proof stacked high enough to reshape a life. 1, she said, tapping the top sheet, house title history. 2, your mother's will. 3, mortgage statements. 4, the allotment records. 5, the in-camera request. And she slid a final sheet toward me. 6, intent. I read the paragraph aloud. The Elaine Morgan Choir Scholarship will provide modest annual awards to local students studying music at community college. Mom, right there in ink. Small, steady, practical. It doesn't go in the record, Janine said, but it stays in your folder. Judges like to know where the river flows, not just where it pools. I smoothed the paper flat, swallowing the knot in my throat. She would have liked this. Wednesday nights, chairs stacked, hymnals passed around. She always said music kept the church alive longer than sermons did. Janine smiled faintly. Purpose is harder to argue with than sentiment. We spent the next hour combing through the mortgage servicer's ledger with rulers and highlighters. Most of the entries matched my cycle. Allotments ticked off like clockwork, deposits steady as breath. But 2 stood out, odd amounts, posted on dates that didn't line up with my pay. Accounting error? I asked. Janine frowned. Could be, but look here. She circled the initials next to one entry. This notation isn't from DFAS. It's from the servicer. Somebody else touched this account. The room tilted slightly, the air thickening. Proof should have been clean. This was contamination. I thought of the stranger by the courthouse wall, of his stillness, of how he turned away the moment our eyes met. A coincidence, maybe. Or maybe someone checking if Mom's house was ready to be claimed. That night, back at the duplex, I took the scholarship draft out of the folder and read it again under the kitchen light. The words glowed simple, unadorned, intent, pure as a note held in alto. But alongside it, in the drawer, sat the trident letter, spare, clinical, stripped of the details that still woke me sweating. The contrast was brutal. One paper meant to preserve memory, the other meant to erase it. I ran a load of laundry to quiet my mind, listening to the thump of the dryer, but the thought wouldn't shake. If someone else had been moving money through Mom's account, what did that mean? That Dad had another hand in this? That Dalton had orchestrated more than just a spreadsheet? Or that Mom herself had been paying debts I didn't know she carried? The next morning, we met again to finalize exhibits. Janine set the hymn book note between us, Mom's steady hand, spelling out what she hadn't dared speak. Don't breathe a word to Earl. She trusted you, Janine said. No, I corrected softly. She trusted silence. We both sat with that for a moment. Later that day, I stopped by the credit union to ask about account history. The manager, cardigan buttoned with tidy precision, tilted her head. Funny thing, she said. A few weeks before your mother passed, someone came in asking about her account. Said they were family, wanted to confirm balances. My pulse thudded. Who? She shook her head. I didn't recognize her. Short visit. Signed the guest book, but the signature didn't match your aunt's or your father's. I forced a polite smile, thanked her, and walked out into sunlight that suddenly felt sharper than glass. Another shadow, another breadcrumb. Bedford liked its stories simple. Daughter versus father, scholarship versus sale. But I was starting to understand that the house held more than grief. There were ledgers in those walls, debts tallied in silence, money that moved in patterns I hadn't written. And if someone else had been moving those pieces, then the fight in court wasn't just about property, it was about exposure. As I folded the scholarship draft into my folder that night, I made a private vow. Whatever Mom had been hiding, I would find it. And when I did, I'd decide whether silence still served us, or whether it was finally time to break it wide open. The morning of the motion hearing, Main Street carried the metallic taste of late summer giving way to fall. I wore the same navy dress and flats, plain as paper, armor in their invisibility. Janine walked beside me, files balanced in her arms like they were delicate glass. Inside, the courtroom hummed with fluorescent lights and anticipation. The bailiff called our case, and the air shifted. Knees uncrossed, papers straightened, conversations clipped mid-syllable. Dalton, Dad's attorney, started with his script. Your Honor, this is a straightforward equity matter. My client has maintained the property. The respondent has no history of meaningful financial contribution. We ask that the house be sold before deterioration erodes its value further. His words were tidy, logical, rehearsed. Janine stayed seated. Respondent has provided DFAS records of automatic mortgage allotments, consistent with the monthly note, over multiple years. We've also requested in-camera review of a service verification letter where public disclosure would raise safety concerns. We ask that the court deny the motion to expedite and set an evidentiary hearing. Dalton shuffled pages, eyebrows lifted. Supposed allotments. Opaque, insignificant. Ms. Morgan has no regular employment history. My client has carried this house alone. I kept my eyes on the judge, whose gaze cut through Dalton's polish. Exhibits, he said simply. Janine slid the folder forward. Tabs bright as prayer flags. The clerk carried them up. The judge read in silence. The hum of the lights thickened until it sounded like the building itself was breathing. Dalton sensed an opening and gilded the point, gesturing toward the benches. And Judge, if we're candid, Ms. Morgan has chosen a drifting lifestyle. Odd jobs, no career path. My client's son, by contrast. Address the court, the judge cut in, voice even, eyes sharp. Dalton froze, but Dad didn't. He leaned toward the mic, voice booming like always. She wasted her life, never held a real job. The words landed with a thud that rattled the room. The judge set his glasses down with both hands, rubbed his nose once, then fixed my father with a stare. Calm. Clipped. Sir, your daughter was a SEAL operative for 12 years. The benches shifted like a single lung exhaling. Aunt Luann's purse slipped, thumping against the wood. Kyle's jaw went slack. Dalton's pen stopped mid-note, bleeding ink. The judge's tone carried no drama, only fact. This court has reviewed in-camera verification from Naval Special Warfare Command, sealed pursuant to statute. The fact of service is for purposes of this proceeding only. Its contents are not for public dissemination. Dalton tried to recover, but the oxygen had left his sails. Even if that were so, Your Honor, contribution remains the central issue. Janine stood, crisp as cut glass. Exhibit 4 reflects DFAS allotments posted directly to the mortgage servicer. The amounts match the note. Additionally, we offer a contemporaneous note in the decedent's hand acknowledging those contributions and requesting they be kept from Mr. Morgan to avoid upsetting him. The judge nodded once. Understood. Dad flailed for footing. I kept the lights on. I fixed the faucet. Mr. Morgan, the judge said, still even, you'll have a chance to testify at the evidentiary hearing. Today we are on motions. He turned back to the file, voice like steel. The motion to expedite is denied. The status quo will be maintained. There will be no listing, transfer, or removal of fixtures pending final order. Dalton opened his mouth, but the judge raised a palm, not unkind. We are not going to scramble eggs. We may need to unscramble. Counsel will confer on dates. A ripple of relieved air moved through the benches. The judge replaced his glasses and glanced at me. Ms. Morgan, your counsel has proffered a purpose connected to your mother's memorial preferences. If you wish to present that formally later, you may. Yes, sir, I said, voice steady. Something inside me loosened, a fist unclenched after years. The bailiff called the next case. The machinery of other lives rumbled forward. We gathered our papers, knees trembling just enough to remind me I was still flesh. Outside, the courthouse steps glowed in afternoon light. The flag hung lazy, the brick warm beneath my palm as I steadied myself. Janine leaned close. That was the heavy lift. Now we make the record. Before she could say more, Aunt Luann touched my arm, her voice trembling. Fair winds, she whispered. It took me a beat, but I answered. And following seas? From the corner of my eye, I caught Cal Whitaker on the lawn, his pressed VFW shirt crisp against the heat. He gave me a look, half salute, half blessing, that said enough. Janine nudged me toward the small podium at the bottom of the steps. A folding table had been set with copies of the order, a microphone taped to a wooden stand. The county clerk cleared her throat and read the short summary. Motion to expedite denied. Title remains with Ms. Morgan. No sale or transfer pending order. Court acknowledges private verification. Parties to return as scheduled. Heads tilted, shoulders dropped. I stepped forward. My hand shook only once as I unfolded the paper. My mother, Elaine Morgan, wanted her house to shelter music a little longer. Today, we open the Elaine Morgan Choir Scholarship at the Credit Union on Main. The first award this fall will help a Bedford student study music at community college. Applications are available at the church office. Murmurs rippled. Relief, approval, a few raised brows. Cal lifted 2 fingers in permission to speak. The clerk nodded. He faced the crowd. Some of you knew Elaine. She filled the middle of a chord so others could sing the melody. That is work. He saluted, crisp, no flourish. The clap that followed wasn't loud, but it was whole. That's when Dad surged forward, hands outspread for a microphone that wasn't his. I have something to say. The judge, stepping out a side door without his robe, angled his head. Mr. Morgan, do not turn these steps into motions practice. Don't put me in a position to discuss contempt. The word contempt landed like a gavel of its own. Dad's hands curled and fell. Kyle guided him back, face flushed. I held up a single sheet, the scholarship flyer, not the sealed letter. If you want to honor my mother's memory, the credit union will accept donations. But mostly what she wanted was for people to show up on Wednesdays and sing. A ripple of laughter softened the air. Cameras clicked like cicadas. And just past the line of reporters by the war memorial, I saw him again. The same stranger from the market. Not clapping, not laughing. Filming only me. Lens fixed, precise. Not gossip, surveillance. I gripped the paper tighter, smile steady. Because even in victory, the fight had only shifted. The days after the courthouse steps felt like air, finally released from a tight lung. People stopped staring outright, though I caught them tilting heads as I walked past. In Bedford, folks adjust quick. They don't erase what they've learned, they just tilt the picture frame until it fits the wall again. I filled my hours with quiet chores, fixed the squeak in the porch swing with a shim, repainted the old mailbox so the mail would land in a place worthy of it. Small work, steady hands. That's what calms the body when the mind keeps circling old battles. One evening, Dad came by with a bag of screws. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps, holding it out like a peace offering. If you want that swing to stop complaining, give it a new hole, he said. You want to do it? I asked. He hesitated, then sat on the steps, sorting screws into neat rows like a boy setting up toy soldiers. Without another word, he fitted them in. The swing settled into place with a sigh, quiet at last. We didn't talk much, just worked side by side until the job was done. When he stood, he dusted his palms on his jeans. You were gone a lot, he said finally, not a question. I was, I answered. I don't need details. His gaze stayed on the porch light. I understand details get people hurt. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was something closer to truce. Kyle texted me later that night. Proud of you. Don't use that against me. A photo followed. Him holding a wrench as big as a toddler. Our language. Sarcasm welded with affection. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, because if Kyle was loosening, if Dad was softening, maybe the years hadn't been entirely wasted. But Janine's call the next morning snapped me back. I pulled supplemental mortgage documents, she said, and something's off. Those stray deposits, they weren't random. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? They came from a shell account tied to a regional contractor under federal investigation 5 years ago. The name on the paperwork, she paused, is Dalton, your father's attorney. The room seemed to tilt, just like it had when I first saw Mom's hymn note. Dalton, the man sitting at Dad's side, rehearsing the argument that I was a drifter with no contribution. His name buried in a case file I'd brushed against once, years ago, when we were warned off contractors who skimmed defense projects like vultures. Janine's voice was steady, but her words carried weight. It could be coincidence, common name, but it's a thread, and threads pull. I sat with that all afternoon, listening to cicadas whir like electric wires outside the duplex. A stranger filming me. Odd deposits in Mom's account. Dalton's name where it didn't belong. When the sun dipped, I walked past the VFW. Cal sat in his plastic chair, cane resting against the arm. He nodded, the same way he had on the courthouse lawn, steady as a clock striking the hour. I nodded back, but this time the gesture felt heavier, like he knew more than he'd ever say. Back home, I checked the swing. Quiet. Checked the porch light. Steady. But in the back of my mind, I could hear Dalton's name rattling like a loose screw that no shim could fix. Dad thought the fight was about a house. The town thought it was about reputation. But I was starting to believe it was about something else entirely. And whatever it was, it had already crept into our lives through a back door we didn't see opening. 2 weeks later, the church library purged hymnals, the ones swollen with age and faint with mildew. Aunt Luann pressed 2 into my hands. Take them, she said. I can't keep every book that smells like your mother. At home, I flipped through the brittle pages, the margins freckled with pencil notes in Mom's careful hand. She'd always sung alto, marking cues, breath points, small reminders. Hold the middle, let melody carry. Near the back of one hymnal, a folded sheet slipped out, lined notebook paper, edges softened by use. Columns ran down the page, neat as ledger lines. Names, amounts, dates. Some circled, some checked off. It wasn't church accounting, it was hers. $25 to Mrs. Doy, $40 for the Beasley's boys' textbooks, $100 to choir robe fund. The sums were small, but they accumulated like drops filling a basin. Quiet debts repaid, kindness measured in ink. I read each entry with a growing ache. Mom had been moving money in silence, funneling help to the town in ways nobody ever saw. Her generosity, hidden behind my allotments, behind her note not to breathe a word to Dad. And then, 2 entries that froze me, dated just weeks before her death, both circled. Both initials written with deliberate care, E.M., A.M. Elaine Morgan to who? Angela? Andrew? Adrian? No surname, just initials. The amount wasn't small, $600, written in her steady hand, circled twice. I traced the letters until the page blurred. Mom hadn't trusted me with this. Or maybe she thought silence would shield me, the same way she believed silence shielded Dad. But silence leaves gaps, and gaps are where shadows settle. When I showed the page to Janine, she frowned, tapping her pen against the margin. A.M. could be anyone, but the timing matters. Right before her passing. Right when those irregular deposits started hitting the mortgage account. Her words slid under my skin like cold steel, so someone else was moving money alongside me. Or using her to cover a debt, Janine said. That night, I sat on the porch with the hymnal open on my lap. The ledger lines stared back at me like an accusation. Who was A.M.? Why circle it twice? A car rolled slow past the duplex. I felt the hairs rise on my arms before I even looked up. Headlights swept, then cut off. The engine idled a moment too long before pulling away. Old instincts coiled tight. I checked the locks twice, checked the shallow drawer, checked the back fence, everything in place. But the question on the page would not leave me. The next Sunday at church, I tried to focus on the choir's recessional, but every alto note pulled me back to the ledger, to Mom's voice whispering in the margins, hold the middle, trust the melody. Only now, I wasn't sure whose melody she'd been following. Cal found me afterward near the punch table, cane steady against the tile. Your mama used to say truth doesn't need to shout, he said quietly, just needs a place to stand. I nodded, throat tight, because the ledger in my pocket felt less like truth and more like a riddle. Later that evening, I copied the entries into my own notebook. Every name, every amount, every date. When I wrote the circled initials, A.M., my hand trembled. Some debts Mom paid in kindness. Others, I suspected, were paid in fear. And fear leaves its own kind of inheritance. It was late, the kind of night when porch lights glow like lonely sentries, when Dad came up my steps carrying an old coffee can. He didn't knock, just set it on the rail like a bill he owed. These were your granddad's first, he muttered, not meeting my eyes. I pried the lid off. Service ribbons, campaign bars, medals still bright despite the years. Vietnam's echoes tucked inside tin. Your mama wouldn't let me hang them in the living room, he said, shifting his weight. Said we'd do it proper when the walls were fresh. His throat worked. Walls are still not fresh. I turned the lid in my hands, searching his face. You want coffee? Not this late, gives me the leg shakes. He rubbed the back of his neck, gaze darting anywhere but me. You need anything fixed? Dottie's porch screen, I said, already on my list. He nodded, as if I'd just given him a map. We stood there in silence, listening to a dog bark in the next yard. Finally, he exhaled. About court. I ran my mouth, got carried away. You know how I am. I do, I said, but you don't have to brag on me. You just can't lie about me. The words hung between us like a plumb line, testing balance. He stared at the ribbons, thumb brushing one bar before he slid it back into the can. That seems fair. Then he glanced at me, eyes sharper than usual. You keeping the house? For now, I'll keep the porch light working. He nodded at the bulb glowing steady above us. Your mama liked a working light. I thought that was the end of it. But as he turned to go, his voice dropped low, stripped of bluster. There's more at stake than just this house. You know that? I froze. What do you mean? He hesitated, jaw tight. Business is bleeding. A buyer's been circling. Man's got money, influence. Wants the property fast. Dalton says... He cut himself off, grinding his teeth. Dalton says it's better if you don't dig. The coffee can felt heavy in my hands. Who's the buyer? He shook his head, already backing down the steps. Doesn't matter. Just don't make this harder than it has to be. But it did matter, because Janine had called me only hours earlier with her own revelation. The stray deposits in Mom's account, they weren't accidents. They came from a shell LLC tied to a regional contractor, a company under federal investigation when I was still in uniform. The name linked to that LLC, Dalton. The same Dalton now sitting beside my father in court, spinning a story of drifters and real men. The night pressed close around me as Dad's taillights disappeared. I carried the coffee can inside, set it on the table, and stared at the ribbons until my reflection blurred in the brass. My chest ached with the knowledge that Mom had left me more than a house. She'd left me a ledger of debts, a porch light that refused to burn out, and a trail of silence leading straight into a lawyer's pocket. The stranger with the camera, the initials AM, circled in Mom's ledger. The buyer Dad wouldn't name. Threads pulling tight. And somewhere in that weave was a truth dangerous enough that even Mom had chosen silence. But silence, I realized, was starting to crack. The Bedford Bulletin ran a story the next week, short as a prayer. Court maintains title. Scholarship announced. No photo, no color, just black ink above the fold. That was the right size for it. People pressed checks into my palm after church, some with commas, most without. Someone left a roll of quarters bound with a rubber band. I liked that one best. Ordinary, steady. At the credit union, Marjorie, the manager, slid a receipt across the desk. Treble clef doodled in the corner. First deposit recorded, she said. Elaine would be proud. I smiled, throat tight, because pride was something Mom gave quietly, never spoken, always shown in the way she left a porch light on, or pressed a hymnal into your hands when you'd forgotten yours. Applications began to trickle in. Stacks of notebook paper, typed essays, clumsy handwriting. Each one carried the echo of a voice that believed music could carry them somewhere else. That's when I saw it. Angela M. scrawled across the bottom of one application. Parent signature. A.M. The initials circled in Mom's hidden ledger. The applicant was Marissa, a girl from choir camp brochures, soprano turned alto. She stood in the lobby with her mother, dressed secondhand, shoes too big. Is it okay to pick up an application? Her mother asked softly. It's more than okay, I said, pressing 2 copies and a pen into her hand. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Marissa chewed her lip. My teacher moved me down to alto last spring. It felt like a demotion. I crouched to her height. It's not. Altos hold the middle. Without you, the melody collapses. Her face brightened, just slightly, like someone had switched on a small lamp in a dim room. When they left, I opened my notebook and stared again at Mom's ledger. E.M. A.M. It wasn't fear. It wasn't debt. It was help. A mother passing something forward to another mother. Quiet generosity, circled twice, because she wanted to be sure it counted. The ache in my chest loosened. But the other pieces still gnawed. Dalton's name in that contractor file, the buyer Dad wouldn't name, the stranger filming from shadows, proofs layered like paper too thin to hide what was underneath. The evidentiary hearing loomed 2 weeks out. Janine prepped affidavits, short and boring, the way she liked. Short and boring saved my life more than once, I told her. On the VFW lawn, Cal signed a one-page statement. He'd heard Mom say the house should stay until the choir fund launched. No embellishment, no detail, just truth standing where it needed to stand. That night, I slid the affidavit into the drawer alongside the Trident letter, the scholarship flyer, and Mom's hymn book note. The wood clicked shut, a sound that always steadied me. Outside, the porch light burned steady, its glow spilling across the repaired swing. Dad hadn't come by again, though Kyle sent the occasional text. Dad's being Dad. Proud of you. Don't quote me. Our truce, written in half sarcasm. I sat with the quiet, listening to crickets volley questions back and forth in the dark. Prepared isn't the same as brave, but sometimes it's the only cousin you need to walk home with. Across the street, a figure leaned against a lamppost, camera strap glinting under the bulb. The same man from the courthouse, the market, the credit union. He didn't move, didn't wave, just waited. I let the curtain fall back, heart steadying into the old rhythm, 4 in, 6 out. Because the hearing was coming, the record would speak, and when silence finally broke, I wanted to be ready for every echo it left behind.